In the early 1760s, a coin dealer in a cramped Frankfurt alleyway made a decision that would reshape the entire financial architecture of the Western world. His name was Mayer Amschel Rothschild. He wasn't a nobleman. He wasn't born into power. He was the son of a money changer, working out of a house so small that his family shared it with another tenant. Yet within 50 years, his descendants would control the largest private fortune in recorded human history. They would finance wars, topple currencies, and quietly dictate the terms on which entire governments borrowed money. How did one man from a Frankfurt ghetto build what some historians estimate became a $20 trillion empire? The answer involves carrier pigeons, deliberate secrecy, 5 brothers placed like chess pieces across 5 countries, and a ruthlessness that most people today have never been told about. The street where Mayer grew up was called the Judengasse. Translated directly, that means Jews' Lane. It was a walled ghetto in Frankfurt, locked every night and all day Sunday. Residents couldn't leave without permission. They paid special taxes simply for existing. Jewish families in that alley were forbidden from owning farmland, barred from most professions, and legally prohibited from marrying without government approval. This was the world Mayer Rothschild was born into in 1744. Most men in that ghetto died within those walls. Mayer decided early that he would not. He apprenticed at a banking house in Hanover, learned the mechanics of currency exchange, and returned to Frankfurt with something most men in his position lacked entirely. He understood how money actually moved between powerful people. His first major break came through coins, not circulating currency, but rare collector coins, ancient medallions, foreign specimens that wealthy German princes considered sophisticated decorations for their private cabinets. Mayer cultivated a relationship with Prince Wilhelm of Hesse-Kassel, one of the richest men in Europe. Wilhelm had made his fortune renting his own soldiers to foreign governments, including the British Crown during the American Revolutionary War. He needed someone he could trust to manage his enormous surplus of cash discreetly. Mayer positioned himself as that man. By the 1780s, Rothschild was managing substantial portions of Wilhelm's fortune. He was lending money on the prince's behalf. He was collecting debts. He was transferring funds across borders with a speed and reliability that no other private operator could match. But Mayer understood something that most court financiers before him had failed to grasp. Proximity to one prince made you useful. Proximity to 5 governments simultaneously made you indispensable. He had 5 sons, Amschel, Salomon, Nathan, Kalman, and Jakob. Each one was trained from childhood in the mechanics of international finance. Each one was deployed to a different city. Amschel stayed in Frankfurt. Salomon went to Vienna. Nathan went to London. Kalman, who later called himself Karl, took Naples. Jakob, who became James, took Paris. This wasn't coincidence. This was a deliberate architecture, a private international banking network built entirely from family blood. When a government in Vienna needed a loan, Salomon handled the negotiation. When the money needed to move to Paris, James received it. The transaction never left Rothschild hands. The Napoleonic Wars were, for most Europeans, a catastrophe. For the Rothschilds, they were the foundation of everything that followed. Between 1792 and 1815, France and Britain were locked in nearly continuous warfare. Governments needed staggering sums of money. They needed to pay armies, buy weapons, fund allies across the continent. Nathan Rothschild in London became the primary financier of the British war effort. He moved gold across enemy lines. He transferred subsidies to allied governments through a network of agents that spanned the continent. Moving that kind of money during wartime should have been impossible. Nathan made it look routine. By the end of the Napoleonic period, estimates suggest he had handled the equivalent of hundreds of millions of pounds for the British government alone. The family's combined fortune had grown beyond anything a Frankfurt ghetto dweller could have imagined 40 years earlier. Then came Waterloo, June 18, 1815, the final battle between Napoleon and the Duke of Wellington. The outcome would determine whether Britain or France dominated Europe for the next generation. Nathan Rothschild had agents positioned near the battlefield. Using a network of fast couriers and carrier pigeons, he received word of Napoleon's defeat a full day before official British government channels confirmed the news. What he did next became one of the most debated financial maneuvers in history. British government bonds, known as consols, had collapsed in price during the war years. If Napoleon had won at Waterloo, they would have been nearly worthless. If Wellington won, they would recover dramatically. Nathan reportedly began selling bonds on the London exchange floor. Other traders, watching the Rothschild agents sell, assumed the worst. Napoleon must have won. Prices dropped further. Then Nathan bought, massively. When the official news of Wellington's victory arrived the following day, bond prices surged. The profit on that single transaction was enormous, though historians still debate the exact scale. What no one debates is the result. Nathan Rothschild was now the dominant financial force in London. By the 1840s, the Rothschild houses had achieved something that had never existed before in the history of private finance. They held near monopoly positions in the sovereign debt markets of France and Belgium. When France needed to issue government bonds, it went to the Rothschilds. When Belgium needed to raise capital for national infrastructure, it went to the Rothschilds. This wasn't charity. The family charged fees and interest rates on terms they dictated. Between 1895 and 1907 alone, the Rothschild banking houses loaned nearly $450 million to European governments. Converted to modern value, that figure exceeds $15 billion. Nations that refused Rothschild terms found themselves unable to access capital markets efficiently. Nations that accepted those terms found themselves in a long and profitable relationship with a single private family. The railways changed everything about the industrial world in the mid-1800s. They also made the Rothschilds dramatically richer. Building a rail network required enormous upfront capital. Steel, labor, land acquisition, tunneling through mountains. Governments and private companies needed financing on a scale that only a handful of institutions could provide. The Rothschilds provided it across Europe, funding railway construction in France, Austria, Germany, Italy, and beyond. They weren't simply lenders. They took equity positions. They owned portions of the lines they financed. When freight and passenger revenue began flowing, a share of that money flowed back to Rothschild accounts. The family wasn't just banking the Industrial Revolution. They were profiting from every mile of track laid across the continent. The Suez Canal deal of 1875 illustrated exactly how that power worked in practice. The Egyptian government, facing a severe debt crisis, decided to sell its shares in the Suez Canal Company. The British government under Prime Minister Disraeli recognized that acquiring those shares would give Britain strategic control over the fastest sea route to India, the crown jewel of the empire. There was one problem. Parliament was not in session. The government couldn't legally raise the funds through normal channels quickly enough. Disraeli sent an urgent message to Lionel de Rothschild in London, asking for immediate financing of £4 million, equivalent to roughly $500 million today. Lionel allegedly asked one question about the collateral. Disraeli reportedly said the British government itself. The loan was arranged within 24 hours. Britain acquired the Suez Canal shares. The Rothschilds collected their commission and interest, turning a single conversation into one of the most profitable transactions of the century. The diamonds and the oil came next. In 1887, the Rothschild banking houses in London and Paris loaned substantial capital to Cecil Rhodes and the newly formed De Beers diamond operation in South Africa. In exchange, they became the largest shareholders. De Beers would go on to control approximately 90% of the world's rough diamond supply for most of the following century. The Rothschilds also moved into oil. They held significant interests in the Baku oil fields in the Caucasus region, at that time one of the most productive petroleum sources on Earth. By the end of the 19th century, their business empire stretched from Indian railways to South African mines to Caucasian oil fields. This was no longer a banking family in the traditional sense. It was a private empire spanning extractive industries across 3 continents. What made the Rothschild fortune different from other vast private fortunes of the era was the deliberate structure Mayer had built into the family from the very beginning. Most great dynasties lost their wealth across generations through inheritance disputes, political confiscation, or bad marriages. Mayer had addressed all of these. His 1812 will contain explicit instructions requiring the family to keep assets within the bloodline, to marry within specific approved families when possible, and to maintain the partnership structure of the banking houses, rather than dividing assets among individual heirs. Daughters were excluded from the inheritance of banking assets. Records were to be kept strictly private. No outsider was to audit the books. This architecture of secrecy and concentrate ion meant the fortune didn't fragment, it compounded. The wine empire followed the same pattern of deliberate, long-term accumulation. In 1853, Nathaniel de Rothschild purchased Chateau Mouton Rothschild in Bordeaux. The family later acquired Chateau Lafite Rothschild, one of the most celebrated vineyards on earth. Today, a single bottle of Chateau Lafite from a great vintage can sell at auction for over $230,000. The wine holdings weren't a hobby. They were an asset class that appreciated for over a century and a half, producing annual revenue while simultaneously building cultural prestige. Real estate followed the same logic. During the 19th century, the family accumulated a large portion of the most expensive property in Mayfair, London. Their English country estates included Wattesdon Manor, a structure modeled on a French Renaissance chateau, built at enormous cost and today valued at over £350 million. Château de Ferrières, outside Paris, was one of the largest private residences in all of Europe. The 20th century brought 2 world wars that dismantled most of the great European banking dynasties. The Rothschilds suffered genuine losses. Nazi Germany seized the family's Austrian assets entirely. The Vienna branch was effectively destroyed. Edmund de Rothschild later recounted that the family had lost assets worth hundreds of millions in the annexation alone. The French banking operations were partially nationalized under the socialist government of François Mitterrand in 1981. On the surface, these appeared to be devastating setbacks, but the London branch remained intact. The family's assets in Switzerland, in the Americas, in their industrial holdings were protected. Within a decade of the French nationalization, the family had rebuilt a new banking operation in Paris. The losses were real. The recovery was faster than anyone outside the family expected. The modern Rothschild & Company Bank manages over 87 billion euros in assets. It advises governments, corporations, and sovereign wealth funds on mergers and restructurings of a scale that would make Mayer Amschel barely recognize the industry he founded. In 2023, the family completed a transaction to take the firm private again, paying approximately $4 billion to buy out minority shareholders and return the business to full family control. That decision was entirely consistent with everything Mayer had written into the family's founding principles 200 years earlier. Keep the assets private. Keep the structure intact. Let no outsider inside the books. Sir Evelyn de Rothschild served for years as the personal financial advisor to Queen Elizabeth II, who knighted him in 1989. The family that once needed a prince's permission to leave the Judengasse was now knighting advisors inside Buckingham Palace. The total Rothschild fortune today is genuinely impossible to calculate. Their assets are distributed across dozens of private holding companies, family trusts, and investment vehicles in multiple jurisdictions. Estimates from financial researchers range from $400 billion to figures orders of magnitude larger, depending on what holdings are included and how far the extended family branches are counted. What is certain is this: Rothschild & Company alone manages assets larger than the entire GDP of many sovereign nations. Their vineyards generate tens of millions annually. Their real estate portfolio spans 3 continents. Their art holdings are estimated at $2 billion alone. And the venture capital arms of the family have reportedly funded over 200 startups in emerging techno-logy sectors, from healthcare to renewable energy to fintech. The empire that began in a locked Frankfurt alleyway continues to expand, quietly, privately, and almost entirely out of public view.